Hey y'all, I got an anime channel called Mystic Sage, where I do anime top 10s, speculations, and more. You can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch to keep up to date with me, the channel, and even for some entertainment. Links will be in the description below. Thanks guys, enjoy the video. Sword and Shield are finally coming tomorrow, and they will mark the true beginning of the future of Pokemon on home consoles, ending a 23-year run on exclusively handhelds, spanning several different releases and models. I thought that it would be a nice farewell to Pokemon on handhelds, to talk about the growth of the series from its humble beginnings as a collectum all JRPG on the Game Boy, to the majority different releases that the 3DS, Ultra Sun, and Moon were. There are over 2 decades worth of developments that were made to help us get from the Game Boy to the Switch, and there really isn't any better time to talk about the journey along the way when you finally reach your destination. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this intro short and just hop right into the evolution of the Pokemon series. On February 27, 1996, Pokemon Red and Green released in Japan, and on September 28, 1998, the games made their move to America with Red and the Japanese Special Edition Blue in place of Green. The games were our first taste of a franchise that would go on to become the highest grossing media franchise of all time, and while it was a rough introduction in many ways, it's proven to be one of the most popular of the 7 generations we have gone through up to this point. Along with the anime, these games were a pop culture phenomenon across the world, and it leads one to wonder if the franchise would be as profitable as it is without that boom in popularity. These games produced a foundation for this empire to be built upon, from its popularity down to its mechanics and features. A beloved feature of Pokemon is the ability for the creatures to follow behind you in the overworld while you travel, and this idea was first delved into Pokemon Yellow. Yellow was the 4th release in Generation 1, and a game that was made specifically to cross over with the Pokemon anime, being the first instance in which a game crossed over with other media in the franchise. Pikachu was your starter in this game, which is the first and so far only time where your starter was chosen for you in the games, and it followed you around the overworld if you had it in your party. Pikachu could be spoken to and would react differently depending on the situation it was in, all the while staying right behind its trainer anywhere they went. This idea of interacting with a Pikachu would again be revisited in the December 1996 Nintendo 64 release of Hey You Pikachu, but we wouldn't see following Pokemon return for quite some time. There was another interesting thing that appeared in these first generations of games that would actually be almost a direct link to what we will be seeing in Sword and Shield: the Experience All. The EXP All was the original iteration of the EXP share, and it was an item that you'd have in your bag that would give experience to all Pokemon involved in a battle. It wasn't just an item to be held by a single Pokemon that would award them XP for doing nothing. In Sword and Shield, of course, there is the EXP share, which will automatically divvy out experience to the Pokemon in your team regardless of if they hit the battlefield, and it cannot be switched off, which is the same idea, but of course as the experience all can be taken out of your bag and put in the PC, thus keeping it from having its effects take place, while the new experience share will be constantly active no matter what. With the first generation, if anything, Game Freak learned one very important lesson for the future of the franchise: they need to improve their quality control. As the company grew, that became an easier thing to do, but Red, Blue, and Green were buggy messes in a lot of different ways, and no Pokemon games since have actually featured the amount of glitches they had. Missigno was probably the most famous glitch for how easy it was to make happen, and several moves and items didn't work as intended and could really screw things up when you were playing the games. Thankfully, as they were the first, Game Freak was able to look at what they did right and wrong and release Gold and Silver as follow-ups, which took upon everything featured in Generation 1 and improved them massively. While being on the same generation of consoles as the Gen 1 games, Gold, Silver, and Crystal were made for better hardware, being the Game Boy Color. In turn, this would mean that this generation would be fully colored, allowing for a much more aesthetically pleasing game to look at. Having color allowed Game Freak to experiment with different color palettes, introducing a fan favorite feature throughout every generation: shiny Pokemon. Of course, the Game Boy Color was more limited in terms of what it could do compared to even the Game Boy Advance, so later generations have a lot more variance in shiny palettes, but you have to give credit where credit is due. Gen 2 really introduced a lot of the features we see and love today, which is probably why it's been my all-time favorite generation for a while now. It introduced us the new typings in Dark and Steel type, retroactively changing the typings of some other Pokemon, which is something we wouldn't see again for over a decade with the Fairy typing in X and Y. These games also provided us with our first instance of cross-generational evolutions, pre-evolutions, as well as branched evolutions, which Pokemon fans have always been excited about. Breeding was also a major component added to the series in this gen, going from simply a way to get a baby Pokemon and starters, to trade to your friends for their starters, into being the best way to make the most powerful Pokemon possible for battling. We also got the day and night cycle, which contributed to the real-world feeling of the passage of time, as well as new evolution methods, as we see with this generation's evolutions, Espeon and Umbreon. There were definitely tons of smaller things introduced in this generation that had become staples of the series, so much so that I need to do a lightning round of sorts just to list them all out. We got held items, berries, the special attack and defense stats, weather, Pokerus, roaming legendaries, animated sprites, battling previously playable characters, and a playable female character. This generation also introduced the idea of going to another region, which has only ever been doable in the Johto games. This idea was almost scrapped, but luckily the great Satoru Iwata was able to help them squeeze Kanto into the games, making for an unforgettable experience. But the most important of all these has to be the trend of having the main legendary Pokemon of the games appearing on the boxes. As we all come to know, the box legendaries are what make or break which version we end up getting, and is a trend that has continued in Pokemon for the last 20 years. and at the moment, it doesn't seem like there's going to be an end to that trend. Again, even putting my Johto bias aside, it's clear to see just how important the Generation 2 games were to the series, with how many long-lasting features it introduced to the series. The third generation came next and was the first Pokemon games that leaped into the advanced generation of Nintendo's handheld consoles. Ruby and Sapphire introduced many mainstays in Pokemon, including abilities, natures, and double battles. It's a little nuts to think that some stuff as important to competitive battling, such as those three things, were only introduced in the third generation of games, but a serious argument could be made that they're three of the most important things to actually stick with the series to this point. Also, with how popular the concept of remakes have become, it'd be foolish if not to bring up that Fire Red and Leaf Green were the first instances of remakes in Pokemon. Many people are excited to see Diamond and Pearl remakes come in the future on the Switch, so it's pretty cool to see that this was the first time games were remade, and that it's something that will probably never go away. The GBA games also boasted the first take at wireless connectivity for Pokemon, relying on simple adapters as opposed to a link cable to trade and battle. There was also an ability to link up to console games and get a certain Pokemon that weren't normally obtainable, like Jirachi, and an add-on disc for the GameCube's Pokemon channel. Ruby and Sapphire Box was a GameCube game that was the first opportunity for a player to take their Pokemon off their cartridge and place them somewhere else to stay, a true predecessor for Pokemon Bank, which came later on. Speaking of Pokemon Bank, the third generation was a starting point for the opportunity to move your old Pokemon all the way up to Ultra Sun and Moon, working up through 3 different console generations. Ruby and Sapphire were the first set of games to offer differing evil teams as well, giving you actual story differences between the two versions as opposed to just differences in the available Pokemon. A true post-game was given to us in this game as well, offering the Battle Frontier is a replayable series of battle challenges that would result in facing Frontier Brains from Metals. Your father would appear for the first and only time in any Pokemon game, and he was even a gym leader. Speaking of gym leaders, this was the first instance in which gym leaders were replaced in a single generation, with Juan becoming the leader of Pseudopolis Gym in Emerald, and the Ruby Sapphire leader Wallace replacing Steven as the champion. There were also multiple rivals for the first time, Wally and May/Brendan serving those roles extremely well in Hoenn. Also, in what would become something built upon way more in the later generations, Castform was the first instance in which a Pokemon had an alternative form, and Deoxys was the first one to have a form be changeable by something not weather related. So now as we leave the Game Boy generation behind, we move onwards to the dual screen generation of the DS. Our first set of games on this new generation of hardware were Diamond and Pearl, followed by the enhanced version of Sinnoh being Platinum and rounded off by Heart Gold and Soul Silver. The only real usual implementation of the dual screen in this generation was keeping the battle commands off the main screen, allowing for layers to see much more of the battle area. Now this generation didn't add a whole lot of stuff, but what it did add was integral to the Pokemon series as well as offering improvements on features from other generations. One of the most important areas it improved on was the well-known physical special split. This greatly improved the usefulness of many Pokemon by having moves of a certain type not be exclusively physical or special. For example, a Pokemon like Steelix with a good physical attack stat but poor special attack could finally take advantage of Crunch, as it is now a physical dark type attack. That's just one of countless examples, but I'm sure you all trust me when I say this changed how Pokemon battled significantly and was one of the best decisions Game Freak ever made. Probably the most important implementation of this generation had to be the full wireless capabilities that the DS had to offer. It allowed for 100% wireless interactions with people from all over the world, allowing all players to trade, battle, and interact in the underground. To this day, we still use GTS when we need to trade with each other, and I imagine we'll still be using it for years to come. Now, with the ability to trade with people across the world came one of the most famous features in Pokemon when it came to getting shinies, the Masuda method. Using this method in Generation 4 made it 5 times as easy to get a shiny, as long as the 2 Pokemon being bred originated from separate countries. Being that the odds of finding a shiny were 1 in 8,192 at the time, this brought the rate to 1 in 1,638, making it much more likely that someone might finally get a shiny Pokemon on their own, which certainly is a plus in my book. We also were introduced to gender differences in some Pokemon in these games, being minor physical changes for the most part. Now this was cool and all, but it seems it was a concept that became more tedious to keep up with as the generations went on, and slowly faded out, being a feature that mattered only appearing every once in a while. There were also ways to evolve Pokemon, as it seems to be the case each generation, this time involving evolution methods based around locations and moves. Examples of this being the evolutions of this generation needing to be leveled up near the Ice and Moss Rock, and Yanma needing to know Ancient Power in order to evolve into Yanmega. Diamond and Pearl also had the introduction of the first ever female champion being Cynthia. This first for the series also provided one of the best challenges for players, as Cynthia had a very diverse and powerful team that was bound to push many trainers to their limits. This was the beginning of the series streak of female champions, as Gen 5 had Iris in Black and White 2, X and Y had Diantha, and technically speaking, the Gen 7 champion is the player, which could naturally be male or female. At the moment, Gen 8 is breaking this stream with Leon, but we'll see if Pokemon Gun decides to feature a female champion once again. But not everything was hunky-dory in this generation, as it did mark the end for a few fan-favorite features. First being a traditional safari zone. Sure, X and Y added the Friend Safari, which is great in its own right, but it just wasn't the same. It also marked the last appearance of the beloved Battle Frontier, which doesn't seem like it'll be coming back anytime soon, which I can honestly say is a huge disappointment. Maybe one day it'll return, but I don't believe today is that day. Other than this, we only had a few more small additions, like being able to travel to another dimension, the return of following Pokemon, as well as the addition of the Pokeathlon in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, and other quality of life changes like poison not fading your Pokemon outside of battle, and being able to run indoors. While this generation may not have brought about the most changes compared to others, you can't take away that it did add some of the best quality of life changes to the series by far. Now comes the 5th generation of Pokemon games, which featured the first ever direct in-region sequels, featuring new areas of the region to explore, a new follow-up story, and new Pokemon forms. Black and White, and subsequently Black and White 2, are heralded as having the most deep and complex stories in the Pokemon games thus far, making it the first time where a story was taken very seriously by the fanbase. Black and White also only allowed you to use Pokemon from that generation up until the post-game, making it the first game since those on the original Game Boy to only feature that region's Pokemon through the initial playthrough. The game was forever changed as well, with the decision to make all TMs reusable, treating them like AHMs had been the whole time prior. Another major addition to the games are constantly moving sprites or Pokemon from both to the front and back, a move that the game stuck with through their journey into 3D. Oh yeah, that's right, these are the final 2D Pokemon games, and the last ones to be from a primarily top-down perspective. As I mentioned before, you can only catch Unova Pokemon throughout the main game until you got into the post, meaning there are no changes to the evolutionaries lines of any Pokemon from previous generations, a first for the franchise. However, they did include something called Pokemon Fusion, which allowed you to splice together the DNA of two Pokemon to create one new one, though it was only available to the box art legendaries, Kyurem and Black and White 2. The Dream World was introduced as an online-based service where you could encounter new Pokemon and hidden abilities, which is something that has stuck around for a while since. We got new battle types that lasted into the next generation with triple and rotation battles, giving a new take on the usual battle system. We had a gym that featured 3 different leaders depending on your starter choice, and the very odd instance where you faced a champion of the Pokemon League after having technically completed the game. There were 3 gyms that were added in the sequels that removed 3 other gyms and leaders and rearranged the order of how the gyms were challenged, and they even allowed you to challenge the Elite Four in which order you liked. With all these cool new features and the ideas that Unova brought us, it's actually kind of interesting to think that the region itself is a departure from the norm. It isn't based on Japan, but rather the United States. The region has a female professor for the first time, which perhaps falls in line with the progression they were looking to achieve in many different aspects of the game's narratives. There are incredible side events to take part in the PokeStar Studio, and the Pokemon World Tournament, which allowed you to face off with so many other gym winners outside of their respective regions, and that was definitely a first. A lot of the things that make modern day Pokemon good came directly from the 5th generation, and with it being the last entry on Nintendo DS before moving on to the 3DS, it's awesome to see the final 2D entry leave such a lasting impact. The 6th generation was Pokemon's first foray into being a full 3D game, and it was included long-desired returns to the Hoenn region, as well as the introduction to Mega Evolution. There were new ways to spend time with your Pokemon and train them with Super Training and Pokemon to Meet. And the Friend Safari was a really awesome way to take advantage of your friends list and find new and exciting Pokemon to fill up your decks. This was the first Pokemon game to include a joystick as a method to move around, giving us our first alternative to a bike with roller skates. The Fairy type was introduced as the first new typing since Gen 2, and several Pokemon had their typings changed due to it. We had the first instance of a mythical Pokemon being obtainable without needing an event, and were even able to obtain large amounts of legendary Pokemon for the first time. A new evolution method for the Pokemon Inkay, which involves turning your 3DS upside down, was also introduced. The first ever dual-typed move became a thing, and you were able to encounter 5 Pokemon at once in the wild thanks to the new Horde battles. For the first time ever, you were able to battle the professor of your region, and you were even able to obtain a second starter from another region in the regular game for the first time as well. For the first time since the 3rd generation, you were given more than one rival, this time double that amount with 4. And with one of the smallest Pokedexes ever, you had only so many Pokemon you could use to choose in battle. There wasn't a lot introduced in the 6th generation that is going to be sticking around with Sword and Shield, but there were plenty of cool things that the games gave us, like the Fairy typing, and the beginning of probably the rest of the Pokemon's life with 3D games. We owe a lot to X and Y and Oras for serving as stepping stones too, in the same vein that Red and Green did all those years back when it comes to designing and properly running 3D games. And finally, we have the last generation on handhelds, being Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon. Well, that's only half true, as Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee are technically Gen 7 games, but hey, semantics. Anyhow, these games are still pretty controversial, as a lot of people feel they're either really bad or really good. When taking a look at the bad, people really didn't like how easy Sun and Moon were. The tutorials, non-skippable cutscenes, the emotionless player character, Z-moves, and the biggest one being no gyms. Some of these were fixed in their enhanced counterparts, but that doesn't change the fact they were things that bothered a lot of people. But let's talk about the good. This game got rid of HMs once and for Free-for-All introduced big boss battles in Totem Pokemon and Ultra Necrozma, Pokepelago giving our box Pokemon some use, regional variants, having a great story with great characters, and the fact that the player is the debut champion of the region. In my opinion, there was a lot of good in that sentence. Harder Pokemon battles and ditching HMs is something that Pokemon fans have wanted for years, and regional variants were a big fan favorite despite being Kanto only in Alola. There were also interesting concepts like the fact that we have evolving legendaries, Pokemon from other dimensions, and fake outs of who the real villains are. The best way to describe Gen 7 is it's where Game Freak showed they were willing to go against the grain and try new things, even if it meant tweaking the formula that we all know and are used to. And I think that was a good transition to where we are now. With Sword and Shield and even Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, Game Freak has shown willingness to try new things while incrementally improving what works. And as we say farewell to our standard handheld Pokemon games, I think we have a very bright future ahead of us with the Switch and many future generations of Pokemon to come. Well, I certainly hoped you all enjoyed this video. I felt before we moved into new generation of Pokemon, it was important to talk about its roots and how we got to where we are today in the series. Sword and Shield are out tomorrow and mark the start of a new chapter in the series, and I think it'll be really interesting to see where it goes from there. But I want to hear from all you guys though. What do you think of the direction that Pokemon is heading in? And which generation do you think had the biggest impact on the series as a whole? Definitely let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, why not leave a like and subscribe to my channel with notifications on, that way you never miss an upload. If you want to support me further, consider following my Twitch where I stream a lot of Pokemon content and all kinds of other Nintendo content like Zelda, Fire Emblem, and much more. Want to support me further and gain cool perks? Check out my Patreon. Daniel Leone, Lady Crimson, Memory Martin, The Lazy Leo, Matthew Young, Awesome Lego, Jarrett Weiss Austin, Sudden Grider, and Enigma97 did, and I want to thank them personally for going above and beyond. It means the world to me. I think I'm gonna wrap this up though. I'm Mr. Gumbrand, and I will see you in the future for more awesome Pokemon content.